Story 1: The Screams Beyond the Highway. Ethan's eyes stung from fatigue as the headlights carved narrow tunnels into the darkness ahead. He rubbed them with one hand, gripping the steering wheel of the 18-wheeler with the other. The clock on the dashboard read 12:03 a.m. Beside him, Maria sat curled up in the passenger seat, earbuds in, staring blankly out into the endless curtain of trees that lined the rural highway. "You're sure you don't want to nap?" Ethan asked, his voice gravelly. Maria shook her head. "I can't sleep. Too many trees. Feels like they're all watching us." Ethan chuckled under his breath, though the remark didn't sit well. The woods were thick here, and the deeper the night grew, the more oppressive they seemed. Like the black trunks and tangled branches were pressing closer and closer to the road. The hum of the engine filled the cab until something pierced it. A sound, sharp and shrill, cut through the night. Maria yanked out her earbuds, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan slowed the truck, brow furrowed. The sound came again, clearer this time. A scream, high-pitched, desperate, like a woman crying out for her life. "Jesus," Ethan muttered, easing onto the shoulder. Maria grabbed his arm. "Don't stop. Are you crazy?" "It could be someone who needs help," Ethan said, already putting the truck in park. "Or it could be Maria cut herself off," shaking her head. "Ethan, nothing good comes out of the woods at midnight. Just go." But Ethan had already unbuckled. He'd been driving trucks for 10 years, crisscrossing lonely highways at every hour imaginable. He knew the sound of animals, knew the tricks echoes could play on a man. This wasn't that. That was a woman screaming. He climbed down from the cab, flashlight in hand. The air was cold, unnaturally still. Maria reluctantly followed, muttering under her breath. The beam of the flashlight wavered across the tree line. Branches swayed slightly, though there was no wind. Another scream split the night closer this time. Ethan took a step forward, boots crunching gravel. "Hello," he called. His voice seemed swallowed by the trees. "Do you need help?" The forest answered with silence. Then, faintly, "Help me." Maria's grip on his sleeve tightened. "No, Ethan, please, that's not right." But Ethan's conscience clawed at him. If he ignored it, and it really was a woman in trouble, he'd never forgive himself. He pushed through the underbrush, Maria cursing softly as she stumbled after him. The beam cut through the tangle of branches, illuminating only more darkness. The scream rang out again, but now it seemed farther away, pulling them deeper. "Where are you?" Ethan shouted, heart pounding. No answer this time, just the thrum of his own blood in his ears. They pressed on for several minutes, but the woods only thickened, the night heavier. When Ethan finally stopped, breath misting in the cold air, Maria was trembling. "Do you realize what's happening?" she hissed. "It's leading us, pulling us deeper, like bait." Ethan wanted to argue, but a terrible thought crept in. The sound hadn't remained in one place. It shifted, always just out of reach, like it wanted them to follow. Then came the snap of a branch behind them. Ethan swung the flashlight around, the beam trembling in his hands. Nothing, just trees stretching endlessly. But Maria had already started pulling him back toward the road. "I'm done," she whispered fiercely. "We're leaving now." Reluctantly, Ethan followed, though every step felt like retreating from someone who might still need him. The forest remained silent as they fought their way back to the gravel shoulder. When the truck finally came into view, relief flooded Ethan. But the moment he opened the cab door, another sound tore through the night, this time directly beside the road. A scream so sharp it rattled his teeth. Maria scrambled inside, slamming the door. Ethan climbed in after her, locking it. The truck roared to life, headlights blazing. Ethan pulled back onto the highway, accelerating fast. His hands trembled on the wheel, sweat cold on his neck. The scream rose again, but now it wasn't behind them. It was running alongside. Ethan pressed harder on the gas. The speedometer climbed. Whatever it was, it matched them, invisible in the tree line. Maria sobbed, covering her ears. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence reclaimed the night. The woods looked still again, as though nothing had ever stirred there. Neither spoke for the next half hour. Ethan's jaw clenched, his mind racing, trying to piece together an explanation. When they finally reached a small truck stop, Maria refused to get out. Ethan went inside, seeking something normal, coffee, conversation, anything. He struck up a chat with an older man at the counter, a local by the sound of his drawl. "You didn't stop back there, did ya?" the man asked casually, eyes narrowing. Ethan froze. Backstory 2: The visitor at the window. The house was unnervingly quiet without her parents. Lily had always thought she liked being alone, but now, sitting at the kitchen table with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator for company, she wasn't so sure. The weekend stretched ahead of her like an empty road. and outside the window the suburban street was hushed, the lamplight barely cutting into the midnight shadows. Her laptop screen glowed with half-finished coursework, but her attention kept wandering. She twirled a pencil between her fingers, tapping it against the wooden table, anything to fill the silence. Then, without warning, she froze. Through the window above the sink, something was out there. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a darker patch against the darkness, but as her eyes adjusted, the shape sharpened. A man standing in the middle of the yard, motionless, staring directly at her. Lily's chest constricted. Her first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss it. Maybe a prank, maybe a neighbor. But the longer she looked, the less sense it made. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even shifting his weight. Just standing there. She slid from her chair, heart racing, and tugged the curtain shut with trembling hands. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered to herself. "It's nothing. Just your imagination." She tried returning to her laptop, but her mind refused to settle. Minutes passed like hours, every creak of the house magnified. Finally, curiosity gnawed through fear. She pulled the curtain aside again. The yard was empty. Relief washed over her, but unease lingered. She double-checked the locks on the doors and windows before retreating upstairs. If she could just get to sleep, morning would make everything seem ordinary again. But sleep didn't come. At 12:47 a.m., a noise yanked her upright in bed. A faint tapping sound, slow and deliberate. She held her breath. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from her window. Her bedroom overlooked the backyard. Heart pounding. She forced herself to look. There he was again, the man standing just beyond the glass, his face hidden in shadow, one hand pressed against the pane, fingers tapping lightly. Lily's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled back, grabbing her phone. Her trembling fingers dialed 911. By the time the dispatcher picked up, the tapping had stopped. She risked another glance. The man was gone. Police arrived 15 minutes later. They searched the yard, found nothing. No footprints in the damp grass. No sign anyone had been there at all. They reassured her, suggested maybe it had been a prank, a teenager messing around. Lily nodded, pretending to believe them. But deep inside, she knew what she'd seen. The next night she tried to prepare, the curtains drawn, lights on in every room, baseball bat by her bed. Midnight came and went. Silence held. For a while she even let herself relax. Then, at 1:12 a.m., the knocking began again. Not a tap this time, a knock. Heavy, demanding, right at the glass. Her phone slipped from her hands. She couldn't bring herself to look, but the sound grew louder. Knock, knock, knock. Finally, against every instinct, she pulled the curtain aside. The face that greeted her made her stomach twist. Pale, almost colorless skin stretched tight across sharp cheekbones, lips pressed into a straight line, and the eyes wide, unblinking, reflecting the dim light like animals' eyes. For a moment he didn't move, just stared, his hand flat against the glass, as if testing the barrier between them. Then, slowly, his mouth curved into a smile. Lily screamed, slamming the curtain shut. She locked herself in the bathroom, calling the police again. By the time they arrived, the yard was empty, same as before. This time, though, they found something. Footprints circling the house, dozens of them, in the soft soil. They started at her bedroom window, wound around the entire house again and again, and ended where they began, back at the glass. The officers looked unsettled. They promised extra patrols, told her to stay inside, keep doors locked. But their unease only deepened hers. Lily didn't sleep that night. She barely slept the one after. On Sunday morning, her parents returned, dismissing her story with gentle amusement. "You've always had an active imagination," her father said, patting her shoulder. Too many horror movies, but Lily couldn't shake the image of that face pressed against her window. Later that week, a neighbor stopped by to welcome her parents back. Over coffee, the conversation turned casual until the neighbor mentioned something that made Lily's skin crawl. "Funny thing about this house," the neighbor said. "You know, a man used to live here alone, years before you moved in. Reclusive, strange fellow, never came out much. They found him dead right in that back room by the window. Heart attack, they said. But before that, well," the neighbor hesitated. "People swore they saw him at night, just standing in his yard, staring." Her mother laughed it off politely, but Lily's blood ran cold. She excused herself and went upstairs, unable to listen any longer. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop imagining the man. His pale skin, his unblinking eyes, the way he smiled at her, as though recognizing her. And when the tapping came again at 12:53 a.m., she didn't need to look to know he was there, waiting, watching. Story 3. The Midnight Caller. Jacob had grown accustomed to silence. The farmhouse, tucked deep in the countryside, had been empty since his wife passed 3 years earlier. Once, laughter and conversation filled these rooms. Now only the creak of old wood and the rustle of wind through the eaves kept him company. He told himself he preferred it this way, the solitude, the peace. But there were nights dark, endless nights when the quiet pressed too heavily, when he found himself listening for a voice that would never come again. It was on one of those nights, just after midnight, that the phone rang. Jacob jolted awake, heart hammering. No one called him anymore, especially not at that hour. He shuffled to the living room, picking up the receiver with trembling hands. Hello at first, nothing, just faint static. Then, barely audible, a whisper, ... Joe. Jacob. He froze. Who is this? Silence. Then, the line went dead. Jacob stood in the darkened room for a long moment, receiver pressed to his ear. Finally, he hung up and returned to bed, convincing himself it was a wrong number, maybe kids playing pranks. But the next night, the phone rang again. Exactly midnight. This time, the whisper was clearer. Jacob, I'm coming inside. He slammed the phone down, pulse racing. He checked the locks twice over, every door and window sealed tight. For the rest of the night, he sat in his armchair with the lights on, listening to the house breathe. By morning, he was exhausted, but almost laughed at himself. It had to be someone messing with him. Small-town kids with nothing better to do. He had the phone company change his number. That night, he settled in with a book, trying to ignore the crawling unease in his gut. Midnight came. The phone rang. He answered with shaking hands. Jacob, the voice, raspy and deliberate, slid through the receiver. I'm coming inside. His blood turned to ice. How did you get this number? He demanded. A pause. Then a slow, drawn-out chuckle before the line went dead. Jacob didn't sleep at all. The calls continued every night, precisely at midnight. Always the same words, always the same suffocating whisper. He tried ignoring it, letting the phone ring, but that was worse. The sound filled the farmhouse, relentless, until he gave in and picked it up. And every night, the voice seemed a little closer. On the 6th night, it changed. The whisper was breathless, as though the caller stood right beside him. Jacob, I'm already inside. The receiver slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. His gaze darted around the room, every shadow suddenly alive. He snatched up the old shotgun he kept by the door, heart pounding. Show yourself, he shouted, his voice shaking. The house was silent. He tore through the rooms, kitchen, bedrooms, even the basement. Nothing. No footprints. No open windows. No sign anyone had entered. Finally, he barricaded himself in his bedroom, shotgun across his lap, the phone on the nightstand. Every creak of the old house set his nerves on edge. He told himself it was a prank, nothing more, but in his gut he knew better. At exactly 12 a.m., the phone rang again. He stared at it, dread pooling in his chest. Slowly he picked it up. This time, the voice wasn't whispering. It was right in his ear, a guttural rasp that made his skin crawl. Jacob, I'm here. The line went dead. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. On the staircase. Jacob raised the shotgun, every muscle tense. Who's there? He barked, though his voice cracked with terror. The steps creaked closer. Up, and then the hallway outside his bedroom door was quiet as a grave. Jacob sat frozen until dawn, eyes locked on the door. The footsteps never came again. When the first light of morning bled through the curtains, he allowed himself to breathe. He hadn't slept in days. His hands shook as he dialed the sheriff, but when he tried to explain, he could hear the doubt in the man's voice. We'll send a deputy to check things out, the sheriff said. It sounds like somebody's having a little fun at your expense. The deputy came. He walked the property, inspected the locks, tapped his hat politely, and told Jacob everything looked fine. But Jacob knew it wasn't. That night he poured himself a stiff drink and sat by the phone, waiting. Midnight arrived. The ring split the silence like a blade. With a trembling hand, he lifted the receiver. Jacob, the voice crooned, clearer than ever before. Open the door. Jacob's throat tightened. He slammed the phone down, heart galloping. A second later, a knock came from the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. He froze in his chair, unable to move. The knocking came again, louder. Open the door. Jacob didn't. He sat there until the sun rose, shotgun in his lap, every muscle screaming with tension. The next morning, a neighbor found him. Jacob sat slumped in his chair, the phone still clutched in his hand, eyes wide open. The shotgun lay useless at his feet. The coroner said it was a heart attack. Natural causes. but the neighbor swore she heard something strange when she picked up the receiver, still off the hook, faint static, and beneath it, a whisper, "I'm here." Story for the bridge at Blackwater Creek. The bridge loomed out of the dark like a skeleton stretched across the water, its wooden beams warped and gray with rot. Everyone in town knew the stories. Everyone whispered about Blackwater Creek Bridge, especially at night, but for Tyler and his friends, it was just another dare. "It's just a bridge," he said, grinning at the others. "We drive across, stop in the middle, cut the lights, that's it, 5 minutes, and we're legends." "You make it sound simple," Sarah muttered from the back seat. Her eyes flicked nervously to the trees pressing in on both sides of the road. "But you've heard what happens, Ty." "Yeah," laughed Marcus, riding shotgun. "You see the lady in white, she screams, and you all go home scared. Boo-hoo, big deal." Jess, the quietest of the group, didn't laugh. She hugged her jacket tighter, staring out the window. "They say she drowned her kids here, that she wanders the bridge every midnight, looking for new ones to take." Tyler rolled his eyes, but pressed his foot on the gas. The engine roared as the car bumped onto the first planks of the bridge. It was just past midnight. The river below was invisible, a black void that swallowed sound. The bridge groaned under their weight, and the air felt colder the deeper they went. "Middle of the bridge," Tyler announced, stopping dead center. He cut the engine, twisted the key, and for a moment, silence swallowed them whole. Then he flicked off the headlights. Darkness collapsed around them. The friends held their breath. "See," Tyler whispered. Nothing, just a shape appeared in the beam of the moonlight. At first it looked like mist rising off the water, but then it thickened, took form. A woman, dressed in white, her gown dripping like it was soaked through. Her head hung low, long black hair plastered across her face. Sarah whimpered. "Oh my God." The woman lifted her head slowly. Though her face was hidden, they felt her gaze. Then she raised one arm and beckoned. "Drive." Jess hissed, "Drive now." But Tyler, frozen in shock, didn't move. The woman opened her mouth. A scream tore out so, piercing it, rattled the car windows and vibrated in their bones. Tyler jolted. Fumbling with the keys, the car coughed, then stalled. He tried again, heart hammering. "Tyler," Marcus shouted. The woman screamed again, louder, closer. Finally, the engine caught. Tyler slammed the gas, headlights flaring to life. But the woman didn't vanish. She dropped beneath the beams of the car as though they'd run her over. "Did you hit her?" Sarah cried. The car lurched forward, stalling again at the edge of the bridge. Smoke hissed from under the hood. "Dead." "No, no, no," Tyler muttered, slamming the wheel. Marcus twisted in his seat. "Where is she?" Where a pale hand slapped against his window. Fingers long, nails jagged. The woman's face pressed next to it. Skin gray, eyes black, hollows. Marcus screamed. Sarah and Jess did too, covering their faces. Tyler tried the keys again, but the engine wouldn't even turn. The woman's lips peeled back, revealing teeth too sharp, too many. She shrieked, a sound like metal tearing. The glass splintered under her palm. Out of the car. Tyler yelled. He shoved his door open, stumbling onto the planks. Jess bolted after him, but Sarah froze, paralyzed by terror. Marcus grabbed her arm, dragging her out. The four of them sprinted down the bridge, their footsteps echoing in the hollow dark. The night air bit into their lungs, the shrieking following close behind. Jess tripped, slamming to the ground. Tyler reached for her, but she screamed, "Run," and then she was gone. One moment she was there, the next swallowed by the black void of the river below. "Jess," Tyler bellowed, but Marcus yanked him forward. They didn't stop running until they reached the gravel road on the far side. The shrieking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The three collapsed, gasping for breath, the bridge looming behind them. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably. She took Jess. Marcus shook his head violently. No, she fell. She just fell. But Tyler knew better. He stared back at the bridge, its warped beams glowing pale under the moonlight. He thought he saw her there, the woman in white standing where Jess had tripped, watching, waiting. When dawn came, the police dragged the creek. They found nothing. No trace of Jess. The official report called it an accident, a slip, a fall, a strong current. But Sarah swore she'd seen the pale hand grab Jess's ankle. Marcus swore he'd heard the splash, but no scream, as if the river had swallowed her whole. Tyler said nothing. A week later, he returned to the bridge alone. He had to know. He parked in the middle, killed the lights, and waited. The silence was unbearable. He gripped the steering wheel, every muscle tense. Then came the mist, the shape forming in the moonlight. The lady in white. Her head lifted, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Tyler didn't wait for the sound. He threw the car in reverse, tires squealing, heart jackhammering. When he reached solid ground again, he swore never to return. But he never told anyone what he saw in that last moment, before the car shot off the bridge. Jess, standing beside the lady in white, dressed in dripping white, her eyes black hollows. Story 5. The last train out the subway station was nearly deserted when Daniel descended the stairs. His shoes echoed off the tiled floor, the sound bouncing back at him in lonely repetition. He checked his watch. 12:07 a.m. He'd worked late again, paperwork piling until his manager finally waved him out. The station smelled faintly of damp concrete and dust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering now and then, throwing shadows across the walls. The digital sign above the platform read, "Last train, arrival, 12:15 a.m. Daniel sighed in relief. He'd made it, barely. Missing it meant a cab, and he couldn't afford that. Only a handful of others waited, scattered across the benches. A man in a trench coat, hat pulled low. A woman in a long dress, hands folded neatly in her lap. 2 children sitting side by side, unnaturally still. Daniel frowned. The children looked out of place, no parent, no movement. They didn't whisper, didn't fidget, just stared straight ahead, as if carved from stone. He shook off the unease, telling himself exhaustion was playing tricks. At 12:15, the train screeched into the station. Its cars were old, paint peeling, windows fogged, the doors hissed open. Daniel stepped inside. He expected the usual hum of late-night commuters, but the car was nearly full of people sitting stiffly in silence. Not one spoke, not one moved. He took a seat near the middle, trying not to look at them. The doors clanged shut, and the train lurched forward. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied into a dim glow. Daniel glanced around. Something felt wrong. The air was too cold, his breath faintly visible. The passengers all sat rigid, their faces pale, eyes wide and glassy. He cleared his throat. "Long night, huh?" he muttered to the man across from him. No response, not even a blink. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, tapping his knee. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then the intercom crackled. Next stop, a voice rasped. "Gravesend." Daniel blinked. He didn't know that stop. He'd taken this line for years. There was no such place. He pulled out his phone, checking the transit app. No signal, no Wi-Fi. The screen glowed uselessly. Panic prickled in his chest. He leaned toward the nearest passenger, a woman with dark circles under her eyes. "Excuse me," he whispered. "Did you hear that? Gravesend. Do you know where that is?" Slowly her head turned toward him, her mouth opened. For a moment no sound came. Then, in a voice dry as dust, she whispered, "You're on the last train." Daniel recoiled. Her head snapped back to face forward, her body rigid once more. The train rattled deeper into the tunnel. But Daniel noticed something else. There were no stations passing outside the windows, no lights, no advertisements, just endless black. He stood, moving toward the next car. The passengers' heads turned in unison, eyes following him. He froze, heart hammering. Slowly, he pushed through the door into the next car. It was the same, more passengers, pale and still. Only one seat was empty directly across from him. The train lurched. The intercom crackled again. Final stop ahead. All passengers remained seated. Daniel gripped the pole, sweat slicking his palms. "This isn't right," he muttered. "This isn't." The lights flickered out. In the darkness, whispers rose, low, overlapping voices. He couldn't make out the words, but they surrounded him, growing louder, closer. His pulse thundered in his ears. When the lights flickered back on, the passengers were no longer still. They were all staring directly at him, every face, every glassy eye. Daniel stumbled back. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. None answered. They only watched, their mouths twitching into faint, unnatural smiles. The train screeched to a halt. The doors slid open. Beyond them was no station, no platform, just a vast expanse of fog, rolling endlessly. Faint shapes moved within it, shadows twisting, reaching. The intercom rasped, "Gravesend." All passengers disembarked. The passengers rose in unison, moving stiffly toward the open doors. One by one, they stepped into the fog and vanished. Daniel backed away, panic choking him. No, I'm not getting off here. This isn't real. It's not real." The conductor appeared at the far end of the car. His uniform was ancient, threadbare, his face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. Slowly, he lifted his head. Daniel's blood ran cold. The conductor's face was skeletal, skin stretched thin over bone, empty sockets staring. He raised a bony hand and pointed at Daniel. "You're the last passenger." Daniel bolted for the opposite door, forcing it open, stumbling into the next car. But it was empty now, every seat deserted. The train began moving again, faster, rattling violently. The intercom hissed static, then whispered, "No return." Daniel clutched the pole, screaming, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the train. The windows glowed with a sickly light, fog pressing in until nothing else existed. The car shuddered, the floor vibrating under his feet. Then, with a deafening screech, everything went black. The next morning, the 6 a.m. train arrived at the same station Daniel had boarded. On the platform, workers found his briefcase neatly placed near the bench. His phone sat atop it, screen dark, but Daniel was gone. Security cameras showed him entering the station at 12:07 a.m. He walked down the stairs, stood on the platform, and never boarded a train. Yet, on the footage, as the last train rolled past without stopping, Daniel could be seen in the reflection of the windows, sitting among the passengers, staring straight ahead,